this is Infrastructure Leader Shankar Chandran here. I'm here to share with you about how you build a successful data center. In my experience of 20 plus years in the infrastructure space and about 5 plus years in the data center space, I've built quite a bit of data centers, right, for IBM and for other companies. And I'm here to share with you the key design aspects and the processes, the key focus areas of how you have to build a successful data center. I'll share with you, the so-called procedures in terms of how and in what sequence you need to focus on for you to get a real, results in terms of building a successful data center, and key flaws and key focus areas where things can go the other way around and how you can pull things back in place. So what is a data center? A data center actually is a hosting space where you host servers, networks, your storages, and typically the difference between this and corporate rooms are that these rooms come with very high availability infrastructure with a lot of automations in place to manage itself, whereas in server rooms these are typically cost-effective solutions. Data centers generally are built with high resilience, in terms of power, air conditioning, as well as the network, as well as the telecom space. So let me move into the next slide in terms of the flow consideration that you should follow for you to completely build a data center. The first thing you should talk about is site considerations, and I will tell you why this is so important. It's a bad concept to go back and say, well, I can build a tier 3 data center anywhere. I don't think that's the right aspect. The first thing is you'll have to go back and do a site survey, and then you'll have to see how capable that environmental conditions are around the site that you choose before you make decisions whether you can potentially build the data center you want, or you need to find another place. And then we're talking about the concept design, which talks about a very high level view in terms of what you're trying to achieve at the detail, but you have to build that at the very top layer. And then you're jumping into the detailed design aspects where you go in and take a deep dive into every aspect of design that a consultant is projecting and how the integration happens between multiple consultants who are going to come back and sit down and build this for you. And then in terms of how you're going to build the whole framework of the data center. And finally, not to forget, is to certify to ensure that the considerations that you made out here is achieved at the bottom line. And then the philosophy of how you operate successfully. So let's go back and look at broadly what kind of tiers of data centers that's available in industry, right? And then I would tell you the key difference in between them so that you understand how important it is to decide the tier and how important this philosophy is. I will start myself at tier 1. Tier 1 primarily is a data center which has a availability of 99.6 times, pretty much with 30 hours of annual downtime is what you get, right? So if you look at the downtime, you're talking about 28 hours, approximately 30 hours. And in tier 2, you get pretty much about 22 hours. And based on this 22 hours of downtime, you'll have to plan your resiliency and redundancy. As you go up the chain, you're talking about tier 2, which is about 2 hours pretty much. And then based on that, you build additional redundancy so that you do something, a philosophy called concurrent maintenance. And as you go up the value chain, which is the top tier, you actually get just about 4 hours of downtime. So it is important that you decide what you want to go after, because that's the key aspect that decides your every other stages of data center philosophy. Moving to the next slide in terms of the design consideration, right? So we're talking first, you have to decide about the tier of the data center. That's what I was talking about when I was running through the previous slide. Based on the tier that you decide, you'll have to go back and do the site survey to see if all these provisioning capabilities associated with the tier is quite possible in the site. Let's take an example, right? So if you're going to put up a tier 3 data center in Jakarta, I would say you go back and decide whether you have the capability of dual sourcing of power to grids, typically, and then you're talking about transportation facility to see if you're able to move things around, and then typically if there's any impact to environmental rigidity, whether it's earthquake prone, all that things comes out here. And then if you have to do emergency evacuation, what are the facilities available out here, and what are the mobilization aspects you've got around the emergency services. And then your reputation and your so-called resiliency in the network. How stable is your network in that surrounding environment? That's the key aspect that you've got to decide. And now you're getting to, once you've done your successful site survey and you do an analysis and you finally decide, yes, this is a right place and this is where I'm going to build one. And that is when you're going to start the next aspect, which is called the high-level design, called the concept design. In the concept design, what we're talking about is trying to put all aspects of the build into the block, right? And see, if everything fits in, because the 4 walls that you have started with needs to fit in, right? You've considered all this, and you'll have to see how it fits in. And once everything fits in, you'll have to decide whether the real hosting space brings in some kind of business plan to see what kind of return of investment is going to fetch you. If you're going to spend $4 million and you're talking about return of investment in 5 years, it makes no sense. It's best it's not build it, right? You're talking about a positive recovery. Positive business cases always have a recovery of the first 2 years, at least for equal in first 2 years, and then we talk about recovery, positive recovery in the 3rd year. So that's the reason why the concept design is built, and trying to put the so-called the maintenance blocks in one corner, and then your operations block in another corner, and then see that's what it is. You're trying to put everything in the block and then trying to build things around, and then see if everything fits in. What is the hosting space, right? Now, once that is built in, then you have a starting point. You know what's the clear hosting space. So you may say, out of that 10,000 square feet of the office and of the floor layout, my clear hosting space pretty much turns out to be 5,500. So you've lost 4,500 for putting up your data center infrastructure maintenance systems. And then you go to the detailed design. Now the detailed design is where you jump in to each and every aspect of the technological services, right? The first thing that's key for a data center, which decides the tier of the environment, is the mechanical aspects. The mechanical aspects actually focuses on air conditioning system, the heating system, that how the heat, it's basically heating is a concept, right? It's just not about equipment heating. It's about, yes, there is a system that is generating heat. The philosophy is about how you're going to take that heat away and convert that in, taking it back into the cooling system and bring it back into the same area so that there's a suction aspect of the cool air that goes in and then the heat air comes out. That philosophy is key because that's where that will be useful when you're designing, when you're bringing in a rack. Because if you're going to give a down throw of an air, and then if you have a rack which is going to do a suction above, it's not going to work. So that's the key aspect in terms of air conditioning and heating system. And then you're talking about the ventilation system, right? If you have a rack, OEM rack, which is throwing the air down, the heated air down, and if you have a ventilation on top, it's pretty much good because the cold air is coming out and the hot air is thrown out, which is good. And then you're talking about humidity control because the latest technology, electronics that is built in, right, is getting compact and compact. And if you have very high level of humidity, electronics will just blow off one day. So it's important that you maintain humidity at the right place. So these are considerations that you would think of to build a mechanical design. Once you design a mechanical system or a detailed design, you're going to go back and choose the system that is going to give you all these functionalities. And once you choose it, you would go back and look at the physical specification of these products, and then going to put it back in the concept design. Now, in most contexts, the so-called the detailed design would shrink because you would have taken a very high level figure out here, and when you jump in, it would have shrunk. So you've gained more space. Now, I will tell you about this catch-22 situation that you may get into, and what are the cautions you would have to take in when you go in this way. And then you're talking about electrical design. Now, electrical design is another key aspects because if you choose a tier 3, you're supposed to have 2 grids. 2 grids coming in from the government source, which means at any point of time, 1 grid has to be available, right? And so when you have the 2 grids available, this is pretty much outside the office that it's available. Now, how are you going to bring these 2 grids inside the data center is the first step. Then you have to ensure that these 2 grid cables that coming from the opposite side, pretty much opposite, and there's no overlap. In simple terms, in English we say, let's not overlap, but it's not true. It has to be right on the opposite side. And then we're talking about, the capacity of the cables, and then we're talking about the supporting environment like the generating system and the so-called capacity of the UPS. Because if the generators are going to kick in like 26 minutes later, then the capacity of the UPS should be to sustain at least for 45 minutes, 2 times 6. Right, so that's the kind of electrical design that comes in, and then that's the entry point. And then we're talking about the distribution side, how the connectivity will happen from UPS right into the rack. Because the racks would have again two sources coming in from two different segments of UPSs and grids and generators. And we want to ensure that it's clearly identifiable, right, and tagged, and then routing as we turn again on the opposite side. Now going next is about the IT infrastructure design, because that, you have the available power and the mechanical system, but that should be, you should be able to access it from the different environment. Like, most of the organizations have enterprise systems globally. So we need to ensure that you're able to connect this environment through a very resilient infrastructure. And then we're talking about a perimeter security, because that eventually will fall into the corporate security guideline, because this is an extended premises from every corporate. And if you're going to do that, you better understand and build a foolproof perimeter security around it. So what if situation, right? So this is where I was talking about concepts about the catch-22, what can go wrong. Now when you finish your, the basic design, concept design, and then went into detailed design, you would notice that the infrastructure area, which was around 44%, would have shrunk down to 38, which is good for us because our hosting space has eventually gone up. But then when the hosting space has gone up, then the requirement of heating and power has also reciprocationally gone up. So which means, have you built that resilience across in your detailed design? Right? If not, you're going to come back. If you're going to come back, again, if the shape is changing, your hosting is going to go back and shrink. So you're in a catch-22. So what is important is when you're building a system, or when you design and when you're reviewing the detailed design, ensure it is scalable in nature. That's the key, right? The reason why we talk about a key aspect of scalability is you don't want to put all your $5 million day one, because that's then you're talking about a huge negative recovery in the first year. So you probably want to take a business assumption that, well, I'm going to fill 20% of my data center year one, and then you probably put in an investment and an infrastructure size of 40%, and then scale up, right? Because you are designing a scalable and concurrent maintenance data center, so you better scale up. So let's look at various concepts in what if kind of a situation, because you need to ask these questions. Let's look at a concept area, because you need to talk about rack specification, right? So let's go into the open market, right? You have, we are going to talk about off-the-shelf racks, and we're going to talk about the custom rack, right? The custom racks pretty much meets the requirement and design aspects specific to the design of the OEM servers or OEM networks. Market neutrality off-the-shelf servers meets broad spectrum of design aspects that probably people will use. So we have to design, and in most situations, the off-the-shelf racks are pretty much wider. So if you're going to use that wider racks, the number of scalable rack areas would be less. If you're talking about OEM rack specification, the number of scalable rack positions would be more. So that's the question that you would have to consider before you go back and put things in there, because you're not going to start putting racks inside the layout. And then you're talking about power requirements, because if you're talking about OEM racks, the number of racks have increased. The number of electrical systems and managements and controls have also increased around it, right? And then it goes back to the capacity of UPS and generators and the grid capacity. And then concepts of air conditioning, because you require far more capacity to cool your system because the number of racking areas have increased. So you have to start from here and then start to match things to see if you have a backing power requirement, backing staging environment, backing air conditioning system, and finally fire separation. Let me come to the fire separation a little later, because that's a little sensitive topic, and that also has some related topics about government regulatory systems. And finally, when you build this, you have to ensure you go back and look at the overall design to see if there is any flaw that has gone uninterrupted or unpredicted. Now let's come back into the fire separation system, right? There's a lot of fire separation concepts that's available. Pretty much the generic one is a water separation, and then you're talking about gas-based separation, right? Now let's look at the pluses and minuses. You may think if a water is sprayed on an electronic system, the electronic system gets burned. But the other way around, if water is sprayed, electrical systems could actually start, it can lead people into electrocution, right? But then let's take about the FM200 system, a gas-based separation system, which if triggered, could actually cause a respiratory system or a respiratory infection on people, and they can die of suffocation. So if you're going to consider this, government regulatory systems like in the United States and Canada they give you FM-based system to start with, but eventually you would have to suppress things with water. And then FM system don't trigger first, it's the water that triggers first, because that gives you some amount of time for people to evacuate. Right, so that's the key concept that you'll have to design based on the regulatory system that's available, that's effectively in place. And then once you build all this, you'll have to factor the whole aspect of this in terms of the bill of material and review your cost budgeting to see how are you doing with assumptions and the realities. If things are changing, let's look at how your variance of the ROIs are, the return of investments are. If you're way off, then you'll have to go back to the finance and let's see how you're going to do it or not do it, and then eventually the rate card. But that's what the sales will effectively use, right? So that's how you have to start asking all these questions and then go ahead and decide what you're going to do. Now, once let's say you've done all this and your recovery, return of investments have been a little better off than your concept design. Then you go into the build and then you start building all these things, validate the design, go back and simulate the failover systems, because you've got to simulate, conceptually simulate the design consideration to see if eventually you get through the certification process. And then you go back and do the routing of grid cables wherever required, and then arrange the layout to ensure that you don't get into issues when you're doing concurrent maintenance, right? And then you have to rearrange the power if required to optimize the place, right? Be open about it, you've not started it, you're still trying to refine things. And then you do the baseline positions of the chillers and then finalize the routing of the fire suppression units. And then you are basically in this detailed design, apart from specification of the individual technologies, you're trying to do the integration of cross-platform, because eventually you're talking about trying to integrate a tool around it to manage the whole system. So let's look at, this is how you're going to do, you're going to have a team of consultants working together along with you and trying to put all things together, because there could be conflict of interest that you need to remove. And then eventually, see how things are put together. This is a high-level view in terms of how how power flows from the grid all the way to a managed environment. So this is about the detailed design I was talking about. And then when you come into operation, right? Now, operations is the key success factors, because it's easy for you to go back and explain to a customer your design aspects of it. But what is he going to eventually be concerned about is how you're going to operate. Because that's what decides whether he's going to land his equipment in the right hands. You've got to prove that point. Right, if you're going to go back and build a service, right? When you're building the service, you're talking about how you're going to onboard a new request coming in from a server, from a customer. And then if the customer is coming, eventually changing the requirement, how you're going to accommodate that. And then if customer want to walk out, how you're going to eventually remove it. And what is key out here is the documentation aspects covering the process, scheduling, security, as well as the procedure aspects. And then you're going to do about the maintenance checklist, because you are going to be managing a very high availability environment, which means we're talking about monitoring mechanical systems, that's air conditioning, humidity and temperature, as well as UPS. And then you're talking about whether your fire systems that you provision are working or not working, right? And then you're talking about a security process, how you're going to manage the control systems that is eventually integrating the security, perimeter security. Are they working? Are they sensing each other? And then you're talking about inventory. And then you're talking about the boarding, staging, and stocking process, right? And then you're talking about eventually trying to put things together into one software called the building management system, so that you have an integration around all those aspects. So you take a one view and you know which segments and which components are not working. And then you're talking about how you're going to do the IT management system around it to manage the availability of it. So you have to consider how much of people are you going to build, what skills, how you're going to rotate them, because you have to eventually be prepared to face crisis about non-availability of manpower on a certain day due to some emergencies, how you're going to manage the situation. And then you're talking about the telecom infrastructure, because here you're talking about just not a single telecom, you're going to have options available. You're going to have multiple carriers available in the same premises, giving options for customers to choose where they want to go with. And then trying to help the sales to eventually sell the whole data center, because that's where you're going to focus on how quickly you can get the return of investments. So in summary, right, this is the overall aspects of what we're talking about. I went through each of them. You were talking about layered consideration, then you're talking about engagement, trying to help, and then before that you're going to build. the design aspects of mechanical systems, the security, and then you're talking about the procedural aspects, and then backed up by how you're going to recover your financials, the capital you invested, and then supporting the sales with engagement. Before you get there, and now you're focused on getting your certification to ensure you call yourself and sell yourself with a effective tiered data center. Now, this has been my experience, and I try to document everything I could. But I'm confident you guys are going to be able to learn with this. And if you believe you're not able to capture anything in certain areas, kindly come back to me and share feedback, and I will get back to you. Thank you very much.